Hi, today we're going to be working on 3D Studio and doing a super basic animation, but using rigging and skin. So to do that, we're going to make the simplest possible worm model. So to do that, first create an extended primitive capsule and just click and drag, let go, and then drag upward to make just sort of a cylinder with some ends on it. It doesn't need to be fancy. In this case, we've got 7 height segments set over here. That'll be important later. It'll lend some flexibility to our animation. The more segments you have, the smoother the form will be as you animate it. But for this exercise, it doesn't really matter. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to convert this to an editable poly. Convert, editable poly. And that will come into play later in terms of how I can manipulate these different segments around the bones that we're going to make. Okay, so the next step is to add some bones to our worm. We're going to want a little bit better view, so I'm going to click into the side view here and focus in on that with this button. Okay, I use the hand down here to pan this down like this. Now we don't need the bones to go quite all the way to the tips of this, but we need them to be inside there. So looking at this view is good, and I'm going to create the bones to the side and we'll put them together later. So go to Create, Systems, Bones, IK Chain. And now we're just going to click up here and come down a little bit. Click again, come down. And we're going to make 4 bones total. Then right click to get out of the creative mode for the bones. So now you can see that these are kind of lined up right next to the model that we've just created. And so we've got our 4 bones ready to go. What you can't see is the direction of these bones because the size of each of these bones is a little small. So let's change the size of these so that we can see the direction of their interactivity. So I'm going to select them all. Now let's see. We'll just select one. Actually, I don't think we can edit all these at once. No. Okay, so we'll just go in here. And you can see that this first bone object it's not very large. It's very, very small. So let's play with this a little bit. Let's try a 4 and a 4 for height and width. And the taper I think we'll just leave. And that's a very good visual model for what we're looking for. So just select the second one and put 4 and 4 in there. Select the next one. And select the last one. Okay, so that's a good start right there. Okay, so the next step is to add some fins to these bones. I think we can right click and just move these over right now. Oh, let's try that again. Okay, maybe not. There we go. So this is the bone that we moved the whole skeleton from. Nope. There we go. Now I can move the whole thing. But you could see if we put this in right now and we're animating in an animation frame where we can't see through the model necessarily, we're not going to be able to access these bones, and we need to be able to find the bones in order to do the animation. So to do that, before we put it inside the model, we're going to add fins. So for this first bone, you can see here that we have our bone object sized this way, and then we have all the fins turned off. So I want you to turn, let's see, the side fins and the front fin and the back fin, and just turn them all on, and you kind of get this default size. But what we need is a size that's big enough to stick out of the model. When you do your animation, you won't be able to see the fins because they don't render. But the fins is how we grasp the model and manipulate the model. So let's do this front fin. We can turn it off and on. So that's the front fin right there. And now let's just change the size of this fin. So we're making it, the size is bigger. We want it to stick out quite a bit further, probably around there. And then the start taper and end taper we can change. So let's just increase the start taper to see what's going on. It's kind of tricky to even see what's going on there. But you can see it's sticking out at a larger angle. Let's just type in 30 there, and then we'll type in 30 down here, and that's about 8. Let's make that 8. You can see that's the shape of our fin, and now we've got a numeric model for the size of the fins that we would like to use here. So let's do the back fin. You can see that one, and we'll just do the same exact thing. So 8 and 30, 30. There we go. And we can't see them in this frame, but it's going to be exactly the same for the side fins. So we're going to do 8 and 30 and 30. And now right click in there or left click, and then as you move this inside, you can see that all the way around the worm, these fins should stick out a little bit. So we can always change the size of these later, but this is fairly good. This is a good size. And so now we got to do that to the other bones. So 8, 30, 30. So click, turn them all on. You can actually do these all at once. 8, 8, 8, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, and 30. And now that matches the first bone. So do the other two bones. Whoops. Going to Control Z that. Don't edit the bone object. Okay, just the fins. So 8. And 30s. Okay. And finally the last one. Okay. Now we'll go back to the first one, and let's just check and make sure that they all stick past the skin a fair amount, and that looks pretty good. So we're good to go for making the fins. Okay, now that we got the bones to match up inside the mesh, we need to attach the mesh to the bones. So go ahead and left click on the mesh. Now it's selected, and now we want to add the bones to the mesh. So we go over here to the modifier list, and we can scroll down to skin. And inside here, we're going to just click and drag this up to add the bones. So click add, and you get this menu. And you can click all these arrows to help select them all at once. You can see there's really 5 bones. One of the bones is a little teeny tip, but we do need it. So just left click here and then hold the control button down to select all of these, and then hit select, and you can see they all appear here in the list. So all these 5 bones have now been added to this mesh. If we click over here now, I'm going to left click here, and I'm just going to left click on this. No, not that one. I'm going to click on this. Yeah, let's start with that. So if we click on this one and we right click and do move, we could see that now that when we move this bone, the whole model moves. But if we click down here, and I'm now this time, well, let's see what happens if we move this one. I don't know. All right, so now it's moving it, but it's attached. It's anchored here at the tip of this top bone. Control Z. Okay, now watch what happens if we rotate this. So we're going to just rotate this bone, and look, the mesh is deforming to match the fact that we're rotating the worm. And you can test that with the other pieces here, and you can see how you could animate individual little sections of the model. Now, see, we have this little tiny tip down here, and I don't know what's going to happen on this one. Let's see what happens when we rotate this tip. Okay, so that bone isn't really doing anything right now. So I Control Z to get rid of that. The last thing I want to demonstrate is if we left click on this, so we right click move, zoom out a little bit. If we move this piece, it moves the bone under it, but not the bone behind it. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so now we've got our basic animating model ready to go. And the next part is going to be put a bitmap on the skin. Okay, so in getting ready to put the skin on here, we need to know the alignment of the worm in the world. So first we're going to move it over, and then we're going to align it up so we can see how it's facing. But we kind of have it facing down right now, in my opinion anyway. So first we're going to rotate this from this top bone because it's our base anchor bone. I'm going to right click, rotate. We're just going to rotate that up so it's kind of facing roughly 90 degrees. Doesn't have to be exact, but it should be close. And that should be good. Now we're going to move it down and over. So we right click, move. We'll move it down kind of to the, not under the floor, but just above the floor so that we can use this plane as a reference. And then we're going to pull it back over here so we can see the progress as the beginning animation starts up. Okay, next we've got to prepare the model for the skin. So without selecting the bone, we need to just select the model itself. We go up here, we go to UVW map. So we do that because it references the skin or the outside of this model in a way that relates to bitmaps. And all these options that are in here, they're useful, but today we're just going to leave it all the way it is and leave it in planar, and we're going to apply the simplest possible method for this today. So after we do the UVW map up here, then we've got to go in and unwrap the map. So unwrap UVW. And now, and you have to do UVW map first. You can't do it later. So if you ever forget, then you just got to go back and undo whatever you did somehow and go back and do this step first. But now we can unwrap. But the first step to unwrapping is to tell the machine where are the seams in the map. If we want this map to come apart in the flat version of the map, then we've got to put the seams in. And we're going to do that with by selecting edges. So we click the edge tool, and in here we're going to click one edge right here because I want to like clip the end of this off, at least figuratively in terms of a map. And then this is the loop tool. So when we hit the loop, the edge goes all the way around like that. And we can come down here and turn that edge into a seam. So we click that, and now you can see that it turned light blue. That means it's a seam that will be taken apart later on when we get to that step. Okay, so we're basically going to do the same at this end. So go back up. We're in the edge select. Right click in here. Okay, there we go. Now we got that edge again. Loop it again. And scroll down. And turn that edge into a seam. Okay, the next one is we want to turn in the bottom. We want to turn the bottom edge of this, the very bottom center edge, right there. And I'm going to zoom so that we can see this a little easier. This bottom edge is the one that has the least visibility. So if we make a mistake or it's sloppy, it'll show the least. So now we're going to select that edge. So we're in the edge select. I right click again to get my arrow back. And I just click this once. And down here, what I'm going to do is hold down the control button. And then as I add all of these edges, it's going to add them all to the selection. Okay, all of those are ready. Now scroll back down and turn that edge into a seam. So now I've got all three of the seams that I need, and we're ready to go for the next step. Okay, so the next step is to peel these pieces off in order to use them. So to do that, we need to select certain polygons. We need to select each chunk of the map. So I'm going to double click this front button, and I'm just going to make sure I align this in the middle where I can't see any of the outer things. So when I select the polys, watch what happens. Let's go up to polygon, and there we are in polygon. Select these, and only the ones that are red are the ones that I want. So you just double check, make sure no other ones are red. And then we scroll down over here to the peel section. And there's various options in here, but we want to do quick peel. But let's first open the UV editor, and you can see right now this is how it appears, and we need the UV map to be our flat map. So we need to convert this, which is currently all these red shapes down here, into a flat form on here. So we go back down to quick peel, and we just hit quick peel, and it automatically gets all those objects, flips them, and aligns them in a way that's useful for us. And you can see that they're not tied to those other objects, and that's because we disjointed them with the edges. The blue line edges that we created made this so that they're not connected to the other pieces here somehow, at least graphically on the bitmap. Okay, so we'll minimize that for a sec. Now we need to do the same thing on the other end. So, and you could see that the peeled piece now has a green line around it instead of a blue line. So, oh, so does this one. Oh, I doubt that it's the same, but let's just see. Maybe it severed the whole seam for us all at once. Okay, so we'll select this end. Again, you can see it's not selecting anything else. And let's open this up so we can see what happens when it happens. Just verify so you can see this, and you can see where the selection is over here. So they're kind of simultaneously showing that. And we're going to come back over here. I'm going to right click right there to change windows, and we're going to go quick peel again. You can see that end has now been quick peeled off, and we can put that over here. Okay, so now the two ends are unwrapped, but the wraparound is still wrapped around in 3D on this two-dimensional plane, and that's not quite what we want. So we want to select the rest of these polygons. So we're going to start from this side, right-click. We're already in the polygon mode, so I'll just select all that. And now you can see that the ends are not selected. We'll flip it all the way over. Oh, that's even more all the way over. Now hold the control button down and select these. And now we can see they've all been selected. Now we'll open our peel menu again, and just want to align things so you can see what happens. So there's our selection. We've selected everything over here, but we want it unwrapped. And so when we quick peel it now, it takes all of those, lays them out side by side in a much larger grid. And now we'll move those over here. Now the trick here is we need all of these shapes to be inside of this square, because this square represents the bitmap that we're going to use to apply a texture to all of these surfaces. Again, there's different ways to do this, but I'm just going to do a fairly quick and dirty method so that you can see one example. So first of all, this needs to fit in here. We need to scale it down. So we use tools similar to the other interface, but it's a little different. Here we have move, rotate, scale, but each of these menus also has options beneath it. See that little black corner right there? So this is the scale menu. So I'm going to click that and hold it down, and I want to scale it both directions actually. So let's just leave it. This is all the directions. So I'll click and drag, and we'll just kind of drag it down until we get it about the right size to fit on this in that screen area. That's not too bad. Now let's move it. So now we can click and move it, and that's pretty cool. Now, if we are able, well, this is actually pretty good the way it is. But let's just go kind of all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom, like so. And I'm just going to, actually I got to put that in the middle. You'll see why in a sec. So put that in the middle. And now I'm going to scale up and down, click and drag, like so. Okay, and that'll help me later to like line, let's line, scale that up just a teeny bit more. If we line the top up with the bottom, oh, actually that won't make any difference at all in this case, so that was kind of silly. But now it's just the right size. So, oh, come on. Let's move that sideways. And down here, I want to move this up a little bit. So this time I'm going to actually select it by vertices. So here's the vertices down here. I'm just going to select these bottom vertices and I want to move them up. So grab them and move them up. Now all those vertices are on the bitmap. So that kind of makes cool sense. Now we're going to select these other models. So I think this is whole element. Yeah, so this is, we don't need vertices. We just want the whole element. So when we click it, all right, let's not do that one. Let's do polygon and we'll select all of these. And now we can move, actually, let's scale these the same because they are the same scale right now. And so we'll scale these down with the top scale tool and we'll scale them down to where we think they're going to fit in one piece of this. That looks good. So now we'll move this over, see if it fits in just half of that area. Yeah, it does. It fits really nice. So we'll put that one there. And then we're going to take this one and put this one here. In some cases, we might actually want the same map mapped on both of these, in which case we could just put one right on top of the other and that would work fine. But not in this case. In this case, it's a worm and we're going to want to have some eyes on here to show us where the face of the worm is. And so now we've got this map. This is going to show when we make this background bitmap and put it in, this is showing us how these different shapes are going to map onto that bitmap. So now we're ready to render this as a template that we can use in Photoshop or in any other program to give us a guide of how we're doing this painting. So up here, I think it's under Tools. Yeah, we're going to render UVW template. So we render it. This dialog comes up. This tells us the size. So our destination graphic needs to be the same size, 1024 by 1024. And then we render the UV template. And it put it on the wrong screen, but here we go. It just rendered this for us. So let me shrink that down so we could see it. And there, whoops. Let's try that again. Okay, again, it's on a different screen. Let's bring it over here. I'm going to use the mouse wheel to zoom out a little bit. So you can see this pattern matches this pattern. Oh, we ended up with two of these. How silly. Okay, and the black part of this pattern in a PNG is going to map as transparent, so it won't be black. And that transparency is what's so useful to us. So from here, we're going to save this. I believe we have a worm folder. And we'll go in there. And now I practiced this earlier, so you can see I've got some other stuff here, but I'm going to put this worm UVW template 01 because I may change my mind and redo it or something. So I'll put 01 on there, hit save. Oh, I've got to choose a format. So I want a PNG because I do want transparency to be to remain. So I choose PNG. A JPG won't work because it can't be transparent. So worm UV template 1, save. All of this you can leave the way it is, and we'll hit OK. And so for sure, this part's going to be transparent. Now, we're done with this for the moment, and we'll use it later to make the graphic. So we can close this window. And the only function of this window was to create the skin. And we are going to use this again, but we don't need it right this. Well, actually, let's leave it up because after we're done editing a picture, we'll need to come back here and see how this works. So for creating the skin or the bitmap texture, you're going to need some sort of photo editing or picture editing software. I'm going to use Corel Photo Paint for this event because I don't have Photoshop on this particular machine. But you can do the same exact things I'm doing here and do it in Photoshop. And if you have any Photoshop expertise, you can figure that out quite easily. Remember, our document for this is 1024 by 1024. So you could see in here, there's not like default sizes for that. So I've just got to put all that in here. So 1024 by 1024. It doesn't really matter the DPI because the pixels are precise. And the rest of this, let's see, color mode is, yep, is fine, 24-bit. Number of frames, I think 1 frame is all we need. And then we can hit OK. And now you can see it's created this square for us. And in Corel, it's an object manager. In Photoshop, these would be layers. So this is the background. This is actually the surface we want to paint on. And if I select a brush, I think we can see that I can paint on this brush. But now I want to add a new object. So now I can't quite remember exactly the easiest way to port that other image in here, but let's create the new object. So we're in object 1. And while that object is selected, we'll go to import. And we will import the worm template that we just created. So we scroll down to the template 01, worm UVW template 01. Click that once, import. And we'll just drop it in, but it should be the right size and it should be lined up properly. Okay, so when we did the import, it brought it in automatically. So we didn't need this other object. So I'm going to right click on that and delete it. And now if we zoom in, we should be able to see those lines, except the background right now is white. So it's a little, it's hard to see the white lines on the white background. So don't worry about that at the moment. You'll see what happens in a second. So for the background of this texture, I selected a leather texture. And I'll select the background, but it's going to be another import. So let's see what happens. File, import. And I want to use this leather square right here. So I get that square and I import the leather square. Again, I can just click it. Oh, but that leather square is the wrong size. So I'm going to undo and I'm going to create a new document. 1024 by 1024, like so. Actually, maybe I'll just I'll open that leather square first, and then I can change it and make it the right size. So we'll resample this square up here. We'll select pixels. Again, you can do any of this slightly different way, but in Photoshop, 1024 by 1024. We'll hit OK. Now we have a larger texture, and now we'll just save it back in the worm folder as a document of the correct size. So go down to the worm folder, and we will put a name in here that shows exactly what we've done. So worm 1024x 1024. Now we can't possibly select the wrong one because we've got the dimensions right there in the file. So we hit save. And it saves that as a PNG again. Okay, now we go back to our UVW background picture and go back into background, and let's try the import again, but we'll import that other file. So here's worm 1024 by 1024. We select that, we drop it in, and it lines it up in our document automatically, but you can see it added it on top of object 2 and not into the background. So we're going to click and drag this object down to change the layer order. And now all of a sudden you can see the UVW. So now that these two pictures are overlaid one on top of the other, you can see where the lines are showing how this background bitmap will get mapped to the worm. Now, of course, when we get ready to use this map in its final form, then we will render the map with the UVW map lines turned off. But we can add bodily features and things to this map. And the UVW guide shows us where to put different pieces in the map and how it's going to be applied. So it's incredibly useful to have this sort of green and white line transparent template over our bitmap. And we're about to see why that would be. So let's minimize this actually, and we'll come back to this in just a minute. So Now let's go back. Let's see, we'll leave this open too. And let's go back in, let's minimize that. We're going to go back into our screen and to get lined up with our worm. And we want the worm to animate from this direction over here. So this part is the back end of the worm, and this part is the front end of the worm. So the question is, where are these two areas, this area and this area, in terms of the UV map? So let's move this across the screen. We'll bring the map back up, but a little bit smaller, because we need to be able to apply our understanding of this map to the photo document. Okay, now let's say we'll use vertex to do our selection here. So we'll scroll up to vertex. You see right now all those are selected, so click out. This is the nose, and this is the very top of the head. And so let's just figure out where this dot, I'm going to hold the control button down and click this dot. And so you can see, wow, we're sort of incredibly lucky that the face is vertically oriented on this worm. So this is one eye and this is the other eye. And if we want a mouth, we can put it down here, and that should line up just perfect on the picture or the 3D model when it maps to the model. Okay, so now we go back to our photo editor. Okay, and we know that this dot and this dot equate to the dots that we just selected in our 3D Studio program. Actually, this is the this is the third dot up. I'd say we should probably do it in the area between the third and fourth dot from the center. Okay, so since we know where we want the eyes in this picture, now when we go to our photo editing software, we know that we're in this part of the circle up here. And in fact, we know that we're like right between this, these 2 points right here. So the size of this is pretty huge. So let's make this more like 20. And now we've kind of got a brush in there. And we got to make sure we're not painting on the foreground, which is object 2, and rather on the background. And we've got black paint selected, and we're going to come up to 3 or 4, somewhere in between here. So actually, let's go, yeah, let's just put a dot right there, and maybe a little bigger than a dot. Then we'll put a dot right there and kind of go around that. Try to make these kind of the same size. And that should be the eyes. And so we should have a mouth down on the bottom of the worm if we're making this. This is going to be a little cartoony, but it's fine. So let's just kind of paint a line right around this. We can kind of make it sloppy like that. Actually, let's put on the next line down. So kind of go like this. And kind of a smiley face on our worm. And hopefully this is on the front. And so now what we do is we turn off object 2 with the eye, and this is our leather texture for the whole object, and we save it. We save it as a PNG. Actually, I think we're going to have to export it from this software. Okay, so we'll file. Let's see. Export. PNG. Worm. And that's the one we want to replace. So we don't want to save it as a new file name. We want to replace it as we go. So we'll click that and export. And yes, we want to replace it. And that's fine. And now we save that. Now, how do we get that into our program over here? So we've got our UVW editor set up, and we can associate the picture here, but that won't show up in the program yet. But we can do that right now. So let's go to the up here where it says checker pattern, and we're going to pick texture. And it's going to be a bitmap. Hit OK. And now we need to get to our texture file on the desktop. Go down to worm. And here's the one with our smiley face that we just made. Hit open. And now it's loaded. And you can see that it lines up just right in the graphic here. So now we're kind of done with this window. We can close it. But if we shift Q in here, let's see what happens. So you see it's still green, even though we've mapped the texture to this map. We don't have an associated texture over here yet. So now we need to make that texture. So to do that, we're going to go to the material editor. We're in a square. This is fine. Our default is fine. So we go down to diffuse, click this. Again, go to bitmap, hit OK. Select the same bitmap. I just double click to load it automatically. And now we need to drag this material onto our object over here. Now this here, it turns gray. We could update this window differently, but for now, let's just hit Shift Q. Now you can see that it's got the eyes here, and you can't see the mouth very well, but it's down there. So we have applied texture in here. Let's go like that. Shift Q again, and you can see you got your smiley face. So maybe higher up on this would have worked, but this is something you'll learn about placement as you just go along with your design work. So now we have a worm with a texture. Okay, now for possibly the trickiest piece of this whole project is going to be just animating this worm to go a couple steps. So what we need to figure out first is, where does he end up after each step? And this worm is about 10 squares long on the grid. And so I've decided I want the worm to go about 2.5 squares, but I need to know where he started, and I need to know where the first step is, and I need to know where the second step is. And so we're going to make a block, an invisible block, to show us the position that we're looking for when we get there. So first, create a box, just a standard box, but make it kind of long and thin like this, and then, oh, misclicked. Let's try it again. Make it kind of long and thin, and then make it like a thin wall like that. Okay, so now from above, we want to align that right up to the worm's nose. So I right click, move, bring it down, kind of center it a little bit. Doesn't have to be exact. So there we go. Now the trick here is we don't want this block to be in the animation. So we right click on it, and we go to Object Properties, Rendering Control. All we have to do is uncheck Renderable. And to check this, we can see that the worm is in scene, and we know the bones don't render, but let's just do Shift Q, and we can see there's no block in here in front of our image. So we know that this block will be invisible when it comes time to render. Okay, so now we right click on it, make a duplicate by going to Clone. We need a copy, and we'll just move this about 2.5 squares out. Okay, and then we're going to do it again. Right click, clone, and we'll move it 2.5 squares out again. Again, it doesn't have to be exact, but this is pretty close. Okay, so now these blocks can show us the distance that we want to go with each step the worm is taking. And it gives us kind of a way to plan out the form of our motion. Okay,